Hello, it's Theology Thursday. I'm Adam, about to be joined momentarily by Lindsay. We're making our way through You Are Not Your Own by Alan Noble. This week we're looking at chapters 4 and 5. If you're not caught up with us, catch up. But don't feel any pressure, because this is a book well worth putting the time into. And you may find yourself having a busy week and you can't put the time in. That's fine. Catch up when you can. And if you've not watched the previous videos, go back and watch them. This is the longer video. We're going to try to make it a little less long than last week's video. That one kind of got a little out of hand, but we had a lot of material to cover. This week we've got no less material to cover, but we're going to try to do it in a little...
We'll try to do it anyway.
Yeah, we're going to try to get through this.
Okay.
So, thanks for joining us.
All right, so this week he's shifting away from this idea that you are your own and moving into the idea that you are not your own.
But instead you belong to God.
Yep.
I would, and he uses the idea interchangeably, belonging to God, belonging to Christ, belonging to God in Christ. Sure.
All right, so chapter 4, we're kind of wrapping up that you are your own, that you belong to yourself, that idea. So he's talking about
that false idea.
Yeah, he's talking about self-medicating and coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And one of the things is he talks about that technology always claims to be optional. This is page 95. You're looking up.
You can cancel the contract anytime.
Yeah, technology is always optional, even when it's impractical to reject. And I was thinking about that, like having to authenticate your identity.
Yeah.
Like, can you even do that without a smartphone anymore? I know some of them, like, I had to download an app.
Yeah. To
then. Anyway,
well, no, Imogene tried to set up a checking account the other day. They literally wouldn't do it in person. She's in the bank with cash money.
She couldn't set up a checking account in person.
Pull up the app on your phone and do it there.
For one, you had to be 18, which weird.
It might have been because a particular banker wasn't there that she was, but it was
really so weird. But it used to be you could set up a checking account if you just had money.
Yeah.
And now you have to be 18, or the account has to be connected to your parent, which I find weird.
Well.
And then you couldn't even, she did it on the phone. I thought, how weird. Like, anyway, so on page 97, he says, we think that the use of some medication is a sign of weakness or immaturity, a sign of inadequacy. But other medications are a sign that someone's taking a proactive role in improving
you go to the psychiatrist and you get on a prescription.
Right. Yeah. And so we have this idea that our coping mechanisms aren't equal. And they aren't necessarily equal, but what's behind them is the same.
Yeah.
Right? But there are like culturally acceptable things to do and non-culturally acceptable things to do.
Yeah.
And some of them don't make a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about, like, if your coping mechanism was drinking versus working out, like you're doing it for the same reason, like excessive working out, not just going to the gym.
Yeah.
Because that's not like a coping mechanism. But some people it is a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're drinking, becoming a drunk is going to wreak havoc on your life. It's going to wreak havoc on your liver, your relationships.
Yeah.
It's going to create a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And, then we're going to get back into that. We're going to need coping mechanisms for our coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And it doesn't only start that way. It kind of starts slowly and builds. And the same thing, excessive working out, like, for the same reason, for an escapism reason, it's going to benefit your health. But you're still going to have the relational problems that come along with it, because you're ducking out of family life.
Yeah, you're absent. You're not present.
Yeah,
sure.
In order to be doing something for yourself. The consequences are not going to be, like, as bad.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to have addiction, but you're going to have consequences, right?
Yeah. Well, there was that lady that we would see walking like all hours of the day back in the neighborhoods back behind us, and she was like scrawny, not an ounce of fat,
but it was all day, every day.
Like, the skin looked really unhealthy.
Yeah.
She was out walking hours and hours every day.
Yeah, she never stopped walking.
No.
So there's this underlying push, though, that's the same in both scenarios. It's just, I need something to get me through. I need something that I control that makes life bearable.
Something, is it the same as something to pass the time?
Not necessarily pass the time. Sometimes it's just distraction. Like, if I fill my life enough, I don't have to stop and think about these things. I don't have to feel.
If I feel it, I don't have to
feel the existential anxiety and the existential guilt, because I can just be busy enough to distract myself enough that I'm not dealing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's still a distraction. And there's going to be a point in both scenarios where it's just not going to be enough that it's for it to be okay anymore.
Gotcha.
At some point, the distraction runs its end.
Yeah.
You can't run.
Well, is it because it's no longer distracting?
Well, the problem is you.
Okay.
And so I can't run from myself forever.
You keep running up against yourself.
Like, I'm always going to be there.
Yeah.
When I lay my head on my pillow at night, my problems follow me because I'm the problem.
I don't think he addressed it in this book. Maybe it was from Disruptive Witness, his book that he wrote prior to this one. He talks about how we get to, and the vast majority of us do it. If you get to a red light, if you don't do it and you get to a red light, just look at the people around you. We get to a red light, you've got like, sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes maybe a minute. Everyone's pulling out the phone, looking through stuff and whatnot.
I don't do that.
I know you don't. I try not to. Every once in a while I will.
I forget my phone
but I try more
often. A lot
often.
of the time.
I try more often than not to not do it, and instead to look, and everywhere I look, other drivers of other cars, everyone's on their phone.
You can't go more than red light to red light without getting that hit.
You don't want to sit there for 10 seconds with your own thoughts.
Right, and so he brings up, like, there's so many different ways that contemporary people cope with modern life. And you can, like, we can make a list, but the list be unending. Like, because you could literally use anything as a coping mechanism. And so the coping, I would say it's a heart issue.
Okay.
What makes the difference between something being a coping mechanism and something just being something you do or something you enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the same activity, like going for a walk. I can go for a walk just because, you know, I want to increase my metabolism before or after eating a meal. I want to, you know, get some vitamin D. I need sunshine. I got to get out of this house. I need to walk. Or it could be I'm clearing my head and trying to cope with my day.
Yeah. It's too loud in the house.
Yeah. Or I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I need to, like, go away before I blow my top.
I'm sorry.
What?
I'm joking.
Oh.
By the way, I don't think it was Alan Noble that pointed that out about stopping at the red light. I think it was actually Mike Cosper, which both of them have written in interacting quite heavily with Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. So I think that's why I was connecting the two. But
so some of our coping mechanisms are more easily categorized. Like something like an antidepressant is clearly self-medicating. It's clearly, I mean, it's doctor medicating.
Yes, but normally,
but how is that different?
Yeah, you don't even have to meet with the doctor.
I don't know. Now you can even do it on Amazon. Amazon has their own thing, and you can get your antidepressants directly from Amazon.
Do you meet with a doctor?
I think it's text.
Telehealth? Okay.
I think you can text somebody. Some of them are video calls, but I think there's text ones too for people who are anxious about videos.
Yeah.
So some of them are more easy to categorize. Some of them, like hiking.
Yeah.
It's not easily categorizable because it's kind of a heart issue.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't know. It depends on what you're doing while you're doing this.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that I can necessarily judge for other people all the time. And they're not evil. I feel like that we should bring that up. He's not saying, "Oh, look at all of us with these unholy crutches."
And he's not even saying that every time you go on a hike, you're self-medicating or you're trying to cope. He's not saying every time you sit down to play a video game that you're trying to escape life.
And he's not saying vacations are bad because you're trying to, like, he's just saying all of our coping mechanisms are because we have a sick society.
And sometimes we do take perfectly normal, natural, healthy things like video gaming. You know, I say that because you can video game with your kid. Well, I don't do it, but you know, you can sit down to video game in order to spend time with your kid. You can sit down to video game in order to connect with friends that you know you've not seen in a while, and you're playing together, whatever. But we will take things and we will instrumentalize them and use them as coping mechanisms. It's not to say that anytime you watch a game or anytime you play a game,
mechanisms are good. Like we're talking about the walk, like a guy going on a walk because he's mad, he's frustrated, he's angry, he needs to clear his head. That is a good thing. Go on a walk. Don't scream at your family.
Yeah.
Like, that is a good coping mechanism.
That should be on a t-shirt. Go on a walk. Don't scream at your family.
Yeah. So the issue is what's driving us to these things, not the things themselves.
So is it like the motivation, the intention?
It's the motivation. We're talking about motivation's the same. We're not talking about the healthfulness or the efficacy of the things are different. And we're not talking about whether they're good or bad. Like, they just are. Like, these are things we do that are not, they don't have value.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't have a good or a bad value. I mean, some of them are objectively.
Yeah, you're not saying they don't have value in the sense that they're,
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So, some of these coping mechanisms, though, are slowly stealing away our life.
Okay.
Like, particularly coping by distraction.
Mm.
You're just eating away the life that you have. You're scrolling, you're watching, you're working, you're just eating away at your biggest non-renewable resource that you have, which is your time.
Yes. Well, and not just in the time you're spending. He mentions Hari, his book Lost Connections, but he's since written another book that is about distraction, and I've not read it yet, but I've heard him speak on it.
Is it on our shelf? Because I feel like every book he's mentioned is on our shelf.
I don't think that would. Well, he didn't mention this book because this book just recently came out, and this book came out, a couple of years ago. But Hari's book about distraction, I forget what it's titled. It's something catchy, but
apparently not catchy enough.
No, well, I haven't bought it yet. But he talks about how, when we sidetrack ourselves. Like, oh, I've got a few minutes. I'm going to take a break. Let me hop to this other thing. And we distract ourselves or are distracted. You're not just losing that time, but you're also losing the time that it takes then to ramp back up to that. I think it's Stolen Focus. Yeah. That's the name of the book, I think. You're also losing the time that it takes to ramp back up to that same level of focus to get the job done.
All the time.
Yeah.
Ransom is the worst at wanting to take breaks when he's reading and breaks when he's doing. But he wants to take a break, not between subjects, which would be totally fun because you're finishing something, you're about to start something else. So, like, the time to start it is going to be there whether you take a break or not. But he wants to, like, take a break in the middle of the subject. I'm like, but you're
in the middle of a paragraph.
You got it out. You got into it. You're halfway through it, and now you want to close it, take a break, and come back, and then have to get back into it.
Yeah, which, it's funny because it takes more time, and we're talking about efficiency, which is something he's railing against. Is like efficiency is not the end all be all, but at the same time, it is important to attend to the thing that you're dealing with, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a book that you're reading, to be present and attentive.
And with our work, if we can't get our work done, then we can't then do the things we would like to do that make our life more full and meaningful. Those things of goodness, truth, and beauty.
Yeah, work hard, play hard.
Like, if you can't get through your science lesson, if that takes you that long, that's time outside you're not getting.
Yeah.
That's, So then you start talking about social media making you feel significant. And there's that sense that you build this bubble and you have community that isn't even really community.
Yeah.
Because it's not community as it should be. Like, there's no real give and take. It's just we all kind of group together based on our similar yellings.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and it's disembodied. It's
And it makes you feel like you're contributing.
Sure.
Even when you're just shouting from your little platform. And so one of the things that I noted is that can also give you a sense of vocation or calling.
Okay.
But I feel like it's almost a false sense. Like, so you spend so much time in, to quote like a Ready Player One, like the oasis, the fake world.
Okay. That
you're not spending time in the real world.
Yeah.
So God's called you to do something, so you're going to do it in the fake world instead of the real world.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Or like people that, like, I'm not saying that Bible study groups on social media are bad.
Or book clubs online.
I'm not saying prayer groups on social media are bad. Yeah. But there are people who, because they moderate a prayer group on social media, that's what God's called them to do. And that's the extent of their involvement in Christian community. And it's just that.
Yeah. And it's easy. Well, yeah. We've seen it.
Yeah. And it makes them feel like they're doing something and feel like they're meaningfully contributing but you're just contributing to noise.
Well,
It's just, I feel like most
And you're
social
able to
media is
keep
just noise.
everyone at arm's length. No one's.
Yeah. You don't have to be real.
Like, nobody's there embodied with you.
And you can do that in embodied things. You are the world's worst at never giving prayer requests.
Sure.
Like, your leg could fall off and it's not making the prayer request list.
No,
at
I'm
church
fine.
on
I've got
Sunday.
this.
Yeah, it's not happening. Like, unless one of the kids writes it down for you, it is not making that Sunday list.
I have a friend who is faithful in asking me, how can I be praying for you? And he asked me that like at least weekly. And I'm always like scratching my head trying to figure out, what do I share? What do I say? And, and honestly, I have been convicted about that, because this is somebody for whom I regularly pray, and shame on me for not giving him the grace of bearing a burden of mine.
Yeah.
Instead, trying to say, no, I've got this. I'm good. Don't worry about praying for me. And so I do, when he asks, I do share something for which I could use his prayers. But
that leads us to vulnerability and community.
Yes.
So there's that performative brokenness.
Yeah.
Which is that obnoxious crying into the camera for the internet.
Yeah.
The videos where people are like crying. There was one recently of a mom on Mother's Day, or no, it was her birthday, I think, and she was having to bake her own birthday cake because she was a single mom.
Yeah.
But then like the husband came out and was like, she doesn't even have custody of the kids. I don't know why she's crying.
Oh,
and then she was like, no, he's a Scientologist. He's gaslighting me. It is a thing. But it all started because she's crying on the camera making a birthday cake.
Mm.
Like, she seriously got out all this stuff to make her own birthday cake, and it was like, man, this sucks. I gotta make my own birthday cake.
Let me videotape
this so that other people can feel my sorrow for having to do this thing.
Yeah. Well,
so my granny would call it airing your dirty laundry in public.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the video aspect, but just the people that post, and it's always what they want to post. Like, no one's ever posting like both sides. Like, no one ever tells both sides of the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Nobody. Yeah.
You're always telling your own side of the story, but like I feel like in social media, you're also then like curating that to like fit what you want it to.
Mm.
Like, it's gotta fit. It's gotta be, the right way.
Yeah.
Like, you can't admit to mistakes you don't want to admit to.
Sure.
So I feel like that he points out public vulnerability is a choice. And some people choose public vulnerability because it gets them attention, because they get to be the victim, because they need people like telling them, hey, it's going to be okay, and they don't have that in their life.
Yeah.
Like, some of these people just don't have it.
Yeah.
Or don't have it on a regular basis. Like,
it'd be really awkward to like go over to your next door neighbor's house, knock on the door, when they answer, be like full on sobbing, talking about life falling apart.
Right.
And I mean, that would be really awkward.
Yes.
However, I imagine the help gotten in such a circumstance would be radically different than the help gotten by a few hundred likes and a couple of shares and that
and
sort
a couple
of thing.
Of bless your hearts.
Maybe a few private messages and whatnot. Yeah, no, I imagine.
And sometimes people do
but you really are risking an awful lot more. You are risking in a very real time way the possibility of rejection.
Yeah, and you can't go back and delete it.
We're about to head to the park. We don't have time for this.
If I share on social media and
you can delete comments.
I can delete I can delete the thing.
Yes.
I mean, and it is social media, so it never disappears truly. But you can delete it so that it's not part of your social image anymore if you wanted to. Yeah. That's different from the embodied brokenness, and it's different from accountability. Yeah. Like, and he says to assume that everyone has an unspoken burden, and you hate it when I point that out.
Oh gosh, especially when it's another driver that's driving crazy.
Yes, that's what the example is.
I'm like losing my mind.
If someone's sitting at a red light too long and you're losing it, and I'm like, maybe they just got news that they have a terminal illness, or their dad just died.
I am being,
and you get so mad because I'm humanizing them.
I'm
humanize the people you want to be mad at.
I'm becoming
right?
daily humbled by that, by having to be the one riding around with Imogen while she's driving, going 30 and a 45, and I'm like, you know, I'm on the one hand, I'm telling her, hey, the people behind you don't want to be going 2/3 of the speed limit, so you got to pick it up a little bit. You gotta go. Don't make angry drivers behind you. Angry drivers are bad drivers.
But at the same time, you're thinking,
but then as soon as there's a honk, I'm like, hey, buddy.
Yeah, and you're thinking, if we're going to hit a tree, I'd rather be going 30 than 45.
Oh, yes.
So, a quote on page 104, he says, I'd suggest that a lot of people you know who appear to be happy routinely wonder why life is worth living. And I feel like that we assume people are better off than they are. Like Adam trying to tell me the other day that somebody with a BMW had their life together because they had a BMW. Because they had a snake on their BMW.
It was a fake snake that looked real. And it was
mad about the snake.
What
and he
lunatic rides around with a snake?
A person who drives a BMW has their life together to the extent that they should not have a snake on their back windshield wiper.
Rubber snake sitting on your windshield
And I'm trying to tell him, like, just because you have a BMW does not mean you have your life together. Like, that's ridiculous.
If you drive a BMW, just know, I think you've got your life together and everything is, like, up and to the right for you.
So, I feel like
But don't drive around with a fake snake on your windshield.
We hear about people's struggles, I feel like, more than, like, our grandparents did. Because of social media. Like, because people are posting.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we are, like, more connected necessarily than they were, or that we're receptive to other people's struggles more than they were.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe it's even made us more jaded than they were, because who doesn't have that problem, you know?
Well, not only that,
but
who also
isn't having trouble buying groceries this month, you know? Like, everybody's got difficulties.
And we often, we can convince ourselves that doing something about it is liking it, commenting, sending a private message, sharing it, that is us doing something. And in some ways it's doing something, but it literally is the bare minimum. The bare minimum would be to just watch and say nothing, do nothing. Yeah. But whereas if you know there is this tangible need, even if it's just an emotional outlet, you know, that is still a tangible need. There's this tangible need that my neighbor has, or my person in our church has. What are you going to do about it?
But then you also have people who dictate how you're supposed to respond.
Yeah. Which does often happen in social media sharing, where they're like, hey, if you're going to say this, keep your mouth shut. I don't want any comments referring to this, or
And so it's always a little bit awkward when actually talking to people, when you get beyond those, like, superficial pleasantries.
Yeah.
But I find, maybe it's because of no, it's not, because most people don't know who I am when they start dumping their life on me in the grocery store.
Yeah.
But I feel like people just naturally tell me everything.
Yeah.
It kind of, I feel like I get beyond pleasantries pretty fast, and maybe it's because I'm not super great at small talk.
Yeah.
I'm horrible at small talk.
Mm.
So interestingly, because I went and looked up antidepressant use by country, because he was talking about that it was beyond biology.
Okay.
Like our antidepressant use, our need for coping is beyond mere biology. And I was like, well, yeah, if it was biological, then it would be the same. It should be similar it should be similar by race. It should be similar by class. It should be similar in every country. And so I started looking up, and a lot of the research listing antidepressant use by country actually leaves out the U.S. because we are the biggest consumer of antidepressants in the world. We mess up all the numbers.
Okay.
And that's even with a lot of U.S. people switching to antipsychotics from antidepressants. So I feel like our antidepressant use, it's not going down, but it is shifting. Like, people are now using more than just antidepressants.
Yeah.
And so most first world countries, in theory, would look the same if it was biological, right? Mm-hmm. And most people, but
at least in first world countries.
That's what I'm saying. First world countries.
Yeah,
in first world countries, it would look similar because access would be similar.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's biology, then race wouldn't really make a difference, because we're not saying like it's some genetic something, right? But the highest rate of antidepressant use is white women with a college education.
Oh yeah.
And so I think there's biological factors.
I'm not stunned by that.
I feel like there are biological factors because I do feel like we don't understand the body at all.
Okay.
I don't feel like we understand hormones. We don't understand like the impact of certain things that we do, like long-term birth control use. Like there was actually a study that showed that it shrinks the brain.
Oh wow.
In women who have taken
women
who have taken birth control for more than 5 years, it shrinks the size of the brain.
Okay.
And increases risk of depression in later life.
Okay.
And so
like post being on
like
control.
post menopause.
Okay.
And so there is that aspect, biological aspect, but there's also like sociological aspect, like because white college educated women are the people who are going to doctors, who are probably going to be the most medicated in general for any medication.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that have the resources to do so, right?
The resources, the time, all that. Yeah.
Right, and they don't have a stigma. There's no stigma in, white culture about taking antidepressants.
Yeah.
That's kind of not a thing anymore. So he said on page 105, he says one demographic copes through extremely self-destructive behaviors, but there are other ways to harm the self, and even more for coping with great unhappiness. So it's hard to look at one metric like antidepressant use and say, oh, here's the problem, because one group doesn't have the monopoly, in the world, and you can't say, oh, these are the sense that you are your own and you have to make yourself, like, we can't be like, oh, this is a rich white woman problem because they're the ones using all the antidepressants, right? Because other people are coping in other ways. It's just antidepressants are an easily measurable coping thing.
The doctors have to keep records.
Everybody's got to keep records, and so we can tell exactly how many people are doing this thing and who they are. So then he starts talking about burnout, exhaustion, and fatigue. Always trying to get through this stage, the struggle.
If I can just.
To get to the real living. And it reminds me of parenting. Okay. Because people always say, like, oh, it's just a phase. But then that phase is followed by another phase. It's followed by another phase. And it's just a long string of phases.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the kid has a growth spurt, and that's a phase because they're eating all the time. And then they have sleep regression, and that's a phase because they won't sleep at 4 a.m. And then they are teething, and then that's a phase. And so it's just one thing after another. And like their whole childhood will just pass and it'll all have been a phase. Well,
life is like the stringing together of phases.
Like, oh, it's just like that doesn't make it different.
The phases are kind of descriptors of you are here. You know?
And I always hate that term, like the season of life.
Yeah.
Like I get the concept. I understand that there is like a progression of like individual development. There's a progression of even family development. Like I understand it as a concept, but it makes you feel like you're always waiting for the next season. Like it's Narnia. It is always winter and never Christmas, and you're always waiting for the spring because none of the seasons of life are spring. None of them are positive. They're all just challenging.
I mean,
they're all challenging.
That is very jaded. I mean, there are springs.
Okay, so like when you're getting married, like you're engaged, you're getting married, and everyone's like, oh, just wait until the wedding's over.
Oh, yeah.
You have that, and then you having your first baby, and you're so excited, and everyone's like, oh, just wait. You know, and they're like, they want you to focus on all those bad things.
The bad is surely coming.
They want you to focus on, like, how bad you feel when you're pregnant and not like the miracles that you feel when you're pregnant. They want you to like focus on like the hormonal preteen and not like how awesome it is that they're like developing some new skills.
Which is it's funny. We have been warned over and over again by a variety of people, some that we like really care about how hard it's going to be when they start moving off to college and that.
Or when they're teenagers, how hard teenagers are. And I'm like, teenagers are really easy.
Well, and some are not, but yeah.
My experience raising teenagers so far has been it's really easy.
Yes.
Preteens, not so much.
I'm not gonna knock on wood because I'm not pagan.
No. Anyway, so he says we all experience a million indignities that proclaim that we're instruments.
Yeah.
Because of legal liability and efficacy.
Oh,
and like I feel like that sums up women's healthcare entirely.
His descriptor of like being at the doctor and needing to have a test run and just click here and you push here to skip everything. I had to do that the other day. It was click there and it skips all this, and it's like pages and pages that just and sign your name.
Anybody that's had a baby in standard American healthcare knows how this goes. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what's important to you. It doesn't even matter what's best for the baby.
Yeah.
It matters what is less liable for the hospital.
Yeah.
It matters what's easiest for their staff and quickest. Yeah. It matters, like, basically just what they want to do. Yeah. Like, you just have to suck it up and go along, because if you want their help, it's either that or you got to go home and have none of it.
They're the professionals, just lie back and shut up.
And so everything, like, a lot of it doesn't even have scientific backing. Like, you're trying to ask them the scientific reason, and they're literally telling you just can't take up a bed for more than 12 hours. Like, it's staffing. And you're like, how is this like, this is the birth of a person. I don't care about staffing issues. Like, those are your problems, not my problems. Yeah. And they should have no bearing on what we're doing here. But the whole thing is about efficacy. Okay. And it's dehumanizing. Like, we jokingly, there's one hospital in Atlanta we call the baby factory. Yeah. Because you're in and out. Yeah. Like, you got 12 hours with your bed and you got to move along. And so, like, and these things are not even for, like, they don't, it's not like, oh, it's safer. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, no, this is just what they prefer.
It's less efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I saw, like, a video of someone sharing this, like, the system tells you that, like, injecting a medication into your spinal column is, like, safe, effective, and normal, but it's too risky to be in a warm bath while you're having a baby. Yeah. Yeah. That's risky, but injecting a medication in your spinal column, that's without risk. That's fine. Yeah. Like, that's just ridiculous. And so, but I feel like all women, even if you haven't had a baby, just women's healthcare in general follows this even more than men's. Yeah. Like, for women to be listened to at a doctor's office, you got to take a man with you. That's the trick. That's the life hack for getting an OB to listen to you, is take a man.
Take your dude with you. Yes.
Which is ridiculous.
I'm wondering though, I mean, women, I feel like women see medical professionals far more often.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so that's part of it.
And part of it is, you know, insurance pays for us to see doctors more often. Yeah. It just is, because we're going to go. You're not going to go. No. Guys are not going to go. Your nose, when you had cellulitis in your face, it was so swollen, and you're like, it'll go away. You had to be hospitalized.
It did eventually go away.
What, 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, I think 4 days. Yeah.
In the hospital, like, in a room in the hospital getting IV antibiotics, because he was like,
that's the only time I've ever been hospitalized.
He refused. He would not even go to the ER. He went to urgent care, and of course they laughed at him and sent him straight to the hospital.
They were freaked out.
They were like, you are not coming in here with that. Oh my gosh. And he was like refusing to go to the doctor. I had to force him. Anyway. So
I didn't have time.
He gets into the self-medicating cycle.
Okay. Yes.
Where you've got one. So.
That's where a coping mechanism brings disorder in life
creates
and discomfort,
a problem.
And therefore you got to come up with another coping mechanism.
Going back to the medical illustration, you have a symptom that's worrisome enough, you go see the doctor. They give you a medication for that symptom. Then you have a side effect that gives you another symptom, and that is worrisome enough that you go to the doctor. And before you know it, you're on a handful of medications, and you probably don't even remember what the first thing even was. So, like, and this is a common way that this plays out. You have a guy that is in a job that he doesn't like with a jerk for a boss. You know, we're not even going to go into the coping mechanisms that made the boss a jerk to the first place. But to cope, he's going to come home in the evenings and play video games. Then his wife and kids are mad because he's never spending time with them. and he's squirreled away. So he withdraws more because when he's around them, they're just nagging him and annoying him. So he plays video games more.
Mm.
And then eventually the wife is like, hey, we need a vacation because this is unsustainable. They go on vacation. Then he can't help on vacation because he's not been around his kids and who knows how long at that point. He doesn't even know what they need.
Yeah.
How to give them a bath, put them to bed. Those are not his things. So then his wife's more mad at him.
Even on vacation, he's probably taking... like self-time.
Yeah.
Like, at the night,
So
get the kids in bed so I can stay up and have a drink
more
or
mad
something.
that like, oh my gosh, we're away and he can't even help. And the fact is he doesn't know how because he doesn't do it. And so then they go home and they'll start the same cycle until they need another vacation. And then she'll be mad at him again on that vacation. And then they'll just do that until the kids have moved off. And his wife eventually gives up and stops even trying. And then like, okay, life's over. Did you spend your life well? Like, you lived in a basement your whole life, playing video games and getting yelled at all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's just one of those, like, this coping mechanism then leads to another coping mechanism, and it just snowballs on you. So then he moves into chapter 5 of You Are Not Your Own, But You Belong to Christ. And he makes that shift from who am I to whose am I.
Yes.
Which I think is a distinctive shift in thinking.
And the presumption is that you do belong.
Yeah.
Like you belong to someone. You do not belong to yourself, but you belong to God. Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting that he starts with talking about Cain attempting to reject God's provision. And I feel like people do that all the time, that enough isn't enough. Like people are like, oh my gosh, I'm just making ends meet.
Yeah.
The ends meet.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing about Cain is he raises his need to God.
Yeah.
And God says, I will provide for that need. And Cain says, okay, great. And then goes and continues to try to provide for his own
need.
Yeah.
But we do that too. Like having enough isn't enough for us. Like in our society, we feel the need that we have to have excess.
Yeah.
Like just making ends meet is not enough for us.
Yeah.
Like we need more.
We need comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we try to do God's job for him, and then we fail miserably because we're not good at that. We build cities to protect ourselves, and then our cities become dangerous places that put us in more harm's way than if we weren't in the city in the first place.
Yeah. Life in the city is rough.
Like, so, anyway. So he also then talks about belonging to God implies limits. And that we don't like these limits.
Yeah.
That if I am my own, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
But that's not true.
No. I mean, just being necessitates limits.
Yes.
Like you are you are not the other, you are not another.
And I have limitations as a human.
Yep.
Like I can't go underwater without, certain stuff to keep me alive because I can't breathe water.
Yeah, and even then, sure, you can be underwater, but you're still limited by the
time
stuff.
and the stuff and the...
Yeah.
Like, I can only be underwater for so long if I'm in this condition, and only so deep. Can't go too deep. Get crushed.
Yes.
And so, we always have limits, but we like to pretend that we don't. Unless we're talking about religious limits. People act like religious limits are, like, ultimately limiting.
Oh, yeah.
But...
Like dehumanizing and oh yeah.
How dare you?
Expecting things of me.
How dare you place limits on me? Like
how
dare God say do not murder? The law can say do not murder, and I say, oh well, yeah, we shouldn't kill people.
Part of the social
but
contract.
God says don't murder, and it's like, well, why? Who can't I murder? Why can't
Yeah.
And we want to like fight that. It's so weird. And we insist on affirmation. Like we can't just. It's not just enough that we have like. No limits. We think that we need affirmation in the way we're living our lives too. Anyway, so he talks about why do people go to church. Or he makes a comment. He says on page 119, because we were talking about that. So page 119, the comment is, it's not uncommon for parents to begin attending church so their children are taught good values.
Sure.
So that made me think like, why do people go to church? How much is that true? So luckily there's Pew Research into why people go to church. One thing first. Did you know that 84% of Christian parents have Christian teens?
Have 84% of Christian parents? No, I didn't know that. Yeah. That's kind of a strange number.
84%.
84%, yeah.
Yeah, 84% of
Christian parents
of Christian
have,
adults
presently have Christian teenagers.
Like we always think teenagers are all going astray.
Yeah.
But
okay.
84% of 84% of parents who are raising 84% of teenagers whose parents are Christian are Christian.
I would want to dig into that number. Well,
it's broken up a little bit. It's like if you're Protestant, it's like 81% of the teenagers are Protestant and 3% are Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Is this like self-reporting Christian parents?
Pew Research is always self-reporting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, on why people attend church, the number one reason for why people go to church, and this is among people who go twice a week or more, their number one reason for going to church is to be closer to God.
Okay.
That's the number one reason people go to church. That's
for
what they
divine
say.
Encounter.
That's their number one priority. That's what they say is the most important.
Okay.
So, 69% of people who go to church twice or more a week or twice or more a month say,
which is regular church attendance these days.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think once a month is probably regular church attendance these days, but 69% of people say that they go to church so their children will have a moral foundation.
Okay.
That's an important reason.
An important reason. Maybe not
only 4% of people say that's the primary reason they
go.
Okay. So, it is a good percentage of people that say that is a good reason to go to church, but it's not their primary reason.
Yeah.
Most people's primary reason is to be closer to God. 68% say it's to make themselves a better person.
Yeah.
That's not their primary reason, but they say it's a good reason to go. 66% go for comfort in times of trouble. Not their primary reason, but they say it's important.
Yeah.
37% of adults who don't go to church don't go because they practice their faith in other ways.
I don't read the church. Yes.
But when asked how often they read their Bible, how often they pray, rarely.
Yeah.
They don't actually do those things. 28% of adults who don't go to church don't go because they believe. Or don't go because they don't believe. So only 28% of the people who are not at church on Sunday morning are not at church because they don't believe in God.
That's interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting number.
That is very interesting because that means most people are not in church not because they don't believe in God, but because they either think that there's a better way than church, they think they know better than God,
and you say that because he prescribed.
Because he told us, he gave us the church.
He designed the church. He founded the church. His son died for the church.
So them saying
this is his prescriptive.
Because I experienced in other ways is them saying I have a better way than God had.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Adam and Eve did, but it is what it is. But it was that or like logistical. I'm just busy. It was like 8%.
I have to work every Sunday.
8% of people I think said that they like physically just couldn't go.
And that's the thing is you do have homebound people.
Yeah.
But I think we mentioned last week, shame on the church if they're not somehow some creative way present to them.
In an embodied way. In an
embodied way.
I don't think live streaming does it.
No.
That's junk.
Yeah.
Anyway, also, I found interesting, young male Democrats are the least likely to go to church.
Not surprised by that. Yeah.
That's the demographic that's the least likely to show up at church on a Sunday morning.
That's funny.
It is funny. So moving on, talking about the Heidelberg Catechism.
Yeah.
It is reformed.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that means we can't learn something from it.
No.
But I thought it was interesting that their catechism starts with the self.
It is. Yeah.
It's kind of oppositional.
I mean, I think it starts where it probably is starting where you are, maybe. But yeah,
it kind of
it does
to the book. It starts with self.
Yeah.
Because it's what's my comfort.
What is your only comfort in life and death?
That's like a very. It's an interesting place to start for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe not where I would have started in a catechism, but
anyway. Although the answer does then bring up the gospel.
Well, yeah.
Which is,
right, as it should.
Yeah.
As it should. It's just, it's an interesting.
But it doesn't start with like what are you? What does it mean to be you?
And even like from her full
that.
perspective, though, it doesn't even start with like God is sovereign over all.
Yeah.
It starts with me.
I mean, he does bring up sovereignty in there, but yeah.
Yeah.
In the answer.
I just found it interesting because that's a more existential.
Yeah. Human-centric, or not even just human-centric, but self-centric.
Yeah. Which is not going to be traditional of, 16th century?
Yeah.
Isn't that what he said?
Yeah. 1563,
yeah.
so 6th century.
So that's not exactly going to be the common position even for the church then.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was just, so I'm just acknowledging the Heidelberg Catechism. I didn't really have anything to say about it unless you do.
Yeah.
All right, so in our modern world, the successful are self-made. I don't know where, the unsuccessful are self-failed. It's always your fault.
Oh, yeah.
We know that's not true. Like, we know that there are circumstances beyond our control, but that's not how we live our lives.
Yeah.
Like, we know that other people can be really unfair, and that sometimes, like, you lose your job because your boss really was a jerk. Or he really did have bad information and he just, like, we know that things are just unfair sometimes. But when we look at somebody, they got fired because of X, like, it's their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of don't live, like, we have this intellectual knowledge that doesn't follow through to the heart.
Yeah.
Culture, then, of course, we talked about that people don't like the religious regulating your behavior, but culture also regulates your behavior.
Yeah.
Right? I said the entire grocery store is just set up to manipulate you.
Yeah. We're under constant influence from others. Yeah.
You can't even, like, go into the grocery store without, like, mind tricks being played on you. But also, like, your information is constantly being, like, monitored, acquired, and sold because your attention is a product.
Yeah.
And so, like, the manipulation happens to you because your attention is the product that's being sold.
Yeah.
And so, but we act like religion, I say we, society acts like religion is some big conspiratorial way to, like, control us, but I mean, society is a way to control us.
Yeah.
So we have this dislike for authority, and that's well earned in most cases
because there's been a lot of abuse from authority. Yeah.
And I feel like now,
but that's not just a religious thing.
Post 2020, I feel like all of us are a little more wary of authority, even if we weren't to begin with. Even though, as like an elder millennial Gen Xer cusper, I've always had a very hard time with authority.
Yeah.
But I feel like authority and accountability are different.
Yeah.
And there's, like, authority that controls, and then there's authority that is accountable.
Yeah. Well, and
that holds you accountable.
Yeah, and it's possible to. It is possible for authority to empower.
Yeah. So, you are not your own, but you're also not mine.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a good distinction, because he made, like, if you are not your own, you are very likely to be taken advantage of. Yeah. And so if we see people as, like, well, they're not their own, but they're also not mine.
Yeah.
Like, I can't just use people because I say, well, they don't belong to them, because they don't belong to me either.
Yeah.
So you can't just use people.
Yeah.
So he talks about, we regularly desire and pursue self-destructive experiences and goals. So no one that eats a Twinkie is under the assumption of health. Everyone knows how bad a Twinkie is.
Oh, yeah. Especially if it's a Twinkie tiramisu.
But Twinkies are still on the shelf.
Yes.
Because we don't care.
Yes.
We're going to choose the self-destruction. We don't care.
Yeah.
We know it's bad for us.
No one goes to McDonald's in order to get a good, healthy meal.
And I always say, like, if you stay up late, like, it's going to give you a bad start tomorrow, but you do it anyway.
Oh.
Like, past Lindsay is always a punk to future Lindsay.
Future Lindsay's always having to pick up
from so many
past
Lindsay problems. So we still all do it.
What did past Lindsay do? She, like, left a wreck for me to clean up. Yes.
Every time. Anyway, so then he shifts to talking about existential belonging. Like we have the existential anxiety, the existential guilt in the beginning of the book, and he's talking about existential belonging. That no matter what I do, I belong because I was made, and therefore I belong.
Yeah, just the fact that being is belonging.
Yes.
Yeah.
So unlike deists, we believe that God is active and working in our world.
Sure.
So he didn't just set something in motion long ago that eventually caused me. I'm not an effect.
We don't just we don't happen to be
right.
happen to belong.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm not an effect of some cosmic domino fall.
Yeah.
Like, I'm intentionally made.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whether we accept it or not, we know that God put us where we are.
Yeah.
As we are. All right, so I thought his quote of, he is not a leader we follow, he's not an employer we run our labor to. In accepting Christ as Lord, we acknowledge our belonging to him as true and good. I feel like we don't get that as much because number one, we don't have a monarchy or anything of the sort. Like we choose our leader. Our leader rotates like every 4 years.
They have to hand off power.
Every year we're choosing a new one. Even if we choose the same one twice in a row, it's only twice in a row. Like then you got to move on and choose somebody else.
Yeah.
And so we don't understand that sense of belonging the same way.
The totalizing effect of Christ being Lord.
Yeah, I feel like ancient people would have understood it better because we don't have any conception of what it means to be under like a king or a queen.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not even a monarchy. We're not even a, we got nobody over us. We're technically supposed to be in charge. Like we live in a country where
for the people, by the people, of the people, of the people, by the people, for the people.
Don't finish that quote on video, please. So, but this belonging doesn't remove our humanity. In fact, it makes us more human.
Yes. Yeah. Belonging to, because we're made in God's image, to belong to God is to be more human than those who he does bring up in some sense, all belong to God because they are created by God.
Whether you choose it or not, existential belonging, you belong.
Yeah.
Like, accept it, don't accept it is the reality.
Kind of reminds me of Being as Communion by John Zizioulas. He talks about biological being, you could say biological belonging. He talks about familial being or familial belonging here. And then he talks about eventually he gets to ecclesial being,
right,
which is where you're belonging
a little bit later
with the church.
So don't get started on that yet.
Okay.
Because he brings that up. Our commitments later.
But as you move deeper into being, you're actually becoming more becoming more human. Yeah. Not less.
Or like the interior castle, like you see more. Okay. Like you're aware of more. Mm-hmm. All right, so justification. We talked a little bit about justification in, I think, week 1. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's that kind of innate existential dread of not being justified.
Yeah.
Not being
having
affirmed,
to justify yourself.
Having to justify ourselves, wanting to be justified as you project yourself to others. To
justify yourself, someone has to affirm that you're justified.
Yes.
Or you can't be.
Yeah.
But in this, he's talking about there's no need to justify yourself if you belong to Christ because you can't.
Because you've been justified in Christ.
Yeah. You can't justify yourself. Yeah. Like, he's the only one that can justify you.
Yes.
Like, it's not... So, there's the song that I am who he says I am.
Sure.
It's not that even here. We're talking about I am because he says I am.
Yes.
Like, my existence itself is just because he says that I am. Mm-hmm. We're not even talking about identity. We're just talking about, like, just my being.
Yeah.
So there's this horrible meme that's circulating right now. You may not have seen it because I probably didn't send it to you because it's heretical. But it's this guy turns to Jesus and says, I want to be like you. And Jesus turns to the guy and says, being yourself is the only way to be like me. What on earth?
I have not seen that.
Oh. Anyway.
That is amazing.
That is often what is wrong.
Yes.
Because
that's one of the reasons I hate meme culture. As much as I love meme culture, that's one of the reasons I also hate it.
But that's one of those if you are your own, then sure, that's true, but you're not. You're his.
Yeah.
And so, like,
so being your own and being true
being
to you
your
is the
own
only
and
way you're like him.
that is not at all how that works.
He truly was and is his own.
Yeah, and like I remember one Sunday you had the quote, like, you know, just be yourself or something.
Follow your heart.
Follow your heart.
Follow your heart.
Follow your heart.
And threw up the image
and then you put up an image of, it wasn't
Manson, Charles Manson.
Yeah, it's Charles
Because
Manson.
everyone knows him when they see him. I thought I was going to use Dahmer, but I thought he's gonna be like, oh, it's a strapping young man.
Yeah. It's like, there's
you see the picture of Charles Manson, it's like,
there's a picture of Charles Manson. It's like, okay,
he's following his heart.
He's just following his heart. So clearly, it's not true.
He's living his best life.
So, but we long to know if any of this matters. Like, it takes us back to those Truman Show questions. It's the, who am I, who are you? Is any of this real?
Yeah.
Like, does any of this even count?
Yeah.
And that's that justification that this counts. This matters.
Yeah.
Like, because God made it, it matters.
Yeah.
But then we still struggle with that self-identity. And part of it is it does take time for our core beliefs to change.
Yeah.
The inner things. And it takes a long time to root out bad enculturation. Like when we talked in week 1 about like being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
Like intellectually we can know, hey, I chose this. This is best for my family. This is worthwhile. I am actually doing work that matters for not just our family, but matters for our culture and our community. But you still have that struggle because you have all this enculturated garbage that you're always sifting through. Yeah. That's always coming back up. You know, things that your grandma told you and, you know, just ideals that you've seen played out in your life. So the church, he says, reminds us who we really are. And he says
whose we really are.
Yes. And he says it reminds us in 4 ways: through liturgy, through serving others, through communion, but in communion he taps in community. Yeah. So he's like communion with community. Yeah. And so how would each of those things tell us whose we are or remind us whose we are? Well,
so liturgy, you know, it often is thought of as a bad word or a dead word. There is no such thing as dead liturgy. There are only dead people practicing liturgy. But liturgy literally just means the work of the people. It is the people's work. And so liturgy is something that the church gives us as the people of God to work with together, to work through together. And every church has a liturgy. Yeah. They all have forms of
even
worship.
Non-formal church.
Yeah, non-formal church.
I grew up in a very
non-formal the most formal church. Ways of being non-formal.
Yeah, I grew up in a non-formal church.
We get,
Fifth Sunday singings. You knew you were doing that 5th Sunday night. You're going to have singing. You know, the things laid out the same way. Like you had your songs, you had your welcome and announcements, you had your sermon, you had your altar call. And there were like appropriate ways to respond to the altar call. Yeah. You know, like we had our way of doing things, even though it was very non-formal. Yeah. And so, even though we didn't do the Apostles' Creed or the doxology, or there were no candles in church.
There might have been candles, but they probably weren't lit. Were there?
Okay, so eventually...
Because a lot of churches do that. They got candles, but they just don't light them.
Eventually, we got rid of the complete altar table and only had the podium. But for a while, we had a table there. Yeah. That actually had stuff on it, I think.
Gotcha.
But then we did away with that.
Yeah. So going back to the church, the church reminds us who we are and whose we are through its liturgy, through serving others. We belong to one another. We are responsible for and to one another. That's not to say that we like answer for one another, but we've got responsibilities in Christ toward one another, and we're given opportunities to serve each other.
I bring a watermelon to church every Sunday.
Yeah.
And cut it up every Sunday.
Everybody looks forward to it, and we bring the tahini along with, and
nobody really appreciates the tahini.
No, we always get some comments like, "Hey, tahini."
We got
Yeah, so we're given opportunity.
A couple people like the tahini with watermelon.
We're given responsibilities in serving one another because because we belong to each other, because we belong to one another in Christ. Communion, I forget, was he talking, he wasn't talking specifically about like the Eucharist, right?
Yeah, he said we come to the table.
Oh, yeah, okay, got you.
In community.
Yeah, and so in the act of celebrating the Eucharist together, we are being reminded who we are and whose we are.
Yeah.
We are the body of Christ. We are those who approach the table, and we are those who approach the table together. Communion. We're being made one with God in Christ by His Spirit, but also we're being made one together with one another.
Yeah.
Communion is not something that we celebrate individually or privately. It is something that is to be shared in community together.
So Noble kind of leaves all of this as a struggle. Mm-hmm. Like we're always going to have this like identity struggle, this struggle happening in whose we are. Like we're going to know it, but we're going to kind of always feel that like angst kind of. Is there more to ending the struggle than Noble points out? And maybe this is a question for like our last like discussion all together.
Yeah.
After we sum up the whole book, but I feel like there's got to be more than just, you're God's and you're in a struggle. Yeah. But be warmed and filled.
I remember in our very first Theology Thursday, we actually did we covered
y'all.
Yeah.
Because we used to do it.
No. Y'all started off with the same book. I think.
What book?
It was Cosper's book, which I mentioned earlier. His book on
No,
y'all didn't. Recapturing the Wonder.
No.
And I remember very distinctively someone who read the book and was there for the conversation and whatnot.
The ladies did not read that one.
This guy, he said, I feel like he ends with just a very unhopeful, prescriptive, like, good luck coping. Here's some things that might alleviate some of the pain.
And like, you're
is there no more hope than that?
Your discomfort is well warranted. And
but that was Cosper, not Noble. I think Noble does give some good hopeful stuff, but I think also, I think that's going to be an important thing to kind of work through as we wrap up the book next week and maybe do some live conversation.
So some of his writing here reminded me of the Brendan Manning.
Yeah.
Where he's talking about there are no neutral actions. You will always leave someone better or worse.
Yeah.
Like, there's no neutrality.
You're going to affect everyone you come across to some extent.
To some extent, and it's either going to be
even the
good
people you don't.
Or bad.
Yeah, even the people that just driving down the road and you're holding up traffic, or you're going to have an effect on the people behind you, even though they don't know your name. They're not going to follow you home more often than not.
The existential butterfly effect.
The existential butterfly.
Well, there's the butterfly flaps its wings, and then it causes it to rain. This changes the wind fluctuations. I don't know. There's the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
Little things cause
the little ripple of the pebble, the tiny pebble being thrown out into the sea.
But I think the difference is in atheistic existentialism, which is not in the notes at all. The effects you have are simply a responsibility to be born. And then if we're talking about from a Christian perspective, the effects that I have can lead people better. I can cause good in the world. Yeah, you're given the opportunity to, in some capacity, be a means of grace in the lives of others, to be salt and light and whatnot. And so that otherwise wasn't there. And so the ripple can be a good ripple.
Blaise Pascal called it the dignity of causality.
Yes.
Like you can, just by acting,
by
showing up and acting, you can do something that was not in the world, that was not.
You see toddlers getting really excited about this when they like throw things in the floor or break things. It's like, I got to cause something.
Yes. They're being more They're being dignified by their ability to cause.
Yes. We're talking about having, causing good things, not chaos.
Not broken glass.
They're like cats.
milk everywhere. Yes.
So then we talk about, and we talked about this a little bit in our, I say a little bit, we talked about it significantly, I feel like, in our short video.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to talk about sanctification and Arminians. Hilariously, he makes the same like dare that I've heard Armenians make. The try to live righteously for 5 minutes or try to avoid sin for 5 minutes. And that's most Armenians are like, well, if you can do it for 5 minutes, why can't you just
I remember
do
that.
It?
That was
Right?
actually an extremely important concept.
So he brought it up and tried to make the opposite point that, like, even for 5 minutes you can't be righteous. And it's like, but
oh, here, hold my beer.
And so some of it is conflating temptation with sin.
Yeah.
That the temptation to covet is the same as coveting, giving into that. That fleeting thought. It is the same as like dwelling, and like the fleeting thought then put under control of the spirit. Like if I have the fleeting thought of like, well, dang it, why did they get a new car?
Yeah.
Like if I'm not immediately like, you know what, like good for them, like praise the Lord. You know.
It begs the question: what do we mean by sin? And if you're talking about sin, as Wesley said, sin properly so called, being a willful transgression of a known law of God, then that is something that can be avoided. Yeah. If you're talking,
I mean, but our thoughts.
Yeah.
The question is, do you think that you have control over your thoughts? Because a lot of this, he's coming from. I know you don't know this, but he's coming from a choice theory perspective. Okay. He might not know that. I don't know how much psychology Alan Noble has studied. I bet he's. But a lot of it's choice theory. That I control my behaviors. I control my actions. I control my thoughts. And so it's
by choice.
By choice, I actively choose them, and by actively choosing my actions and my thoughts, I am then also choosing my emotions, like, to go along with them. But all of that is my own choice. So some people would say that our thoughts are not necessarily completely controllable by us, even though we're the ones doing it. We would say, like, it's subconscious, it's beyond our grasp to, like, control those things. But choice theory says you absolutely control your thoughts. You think the things you want to think. And if you don't want to think them, you wouldn't think them. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, anyway, but I thought it was interesting that he used you can avoid sin for 5 minutes. Like, an alcoholic can, and so his perspective would be an alcoholic can avoid drinking for 5 minutes, but making that a lifestyle is a different story.
Well, yeah, but they still can.
But they still can.
They still can. And many, celebrate years and decades of...
Right. Which I would then say they're not alcoholics anymore, but they choose to call themselves that, so it is what it is. So he conflates the temptation with the sin, and we would agree that it isn't your righteousness that saves you.
Oh, yeah,
I can only make it 5 minutes because Jesus lets me make it 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's I think the scriptures are abundantly clear that the righteousness of Christ becomes your righteousness. Yeah, it is imparted to you, which there'd be a distinction there between Reformed and non-Reformed theologies.
But we would say
imputed, imparted, both. We would say it's both.
We would say it's not my willpower that gets me even 5 minutes. Absolutely. It's His grace that gets me 5 minutes.
Yeah,
But we would also say, yes, it is absolutely possible to overcome the sins of pride, covetousness, and lust. Those are some examples. Like, just try not to be lustful.
The exercise of those sins, yes.
Like, absolutely you can overcome those things. Yeah. Like, if you can't, then why did Jesus die?
Yeah. Well,
if you can't, if sin cannot be overcome, then what's the point? Sorry, that was a side thing.
That's a good question.
But it's always grace that allows you to overcome the sins.
Yes.
It's always Jesus.
Yep.
It's never self, it's never willpower.
Yep. It's always in the power.
Like, that's basically the entirety of the Bible. Is the Old Testament is, here's the law. We can't keep the law. You know? Okay, so then Jesus comes because you can't keep the law.
Well, and the promise of the Father was
He fulfills it.
Was yes, and the promise of the Father was, I will put my spirit in you and cause you to keep my rules.
Right.
Not Jesus will
Not
die on the
just give up
cross
the law
so
part.
that you can get to heaven when you die. Oh,
No.
wait a minute.
There's a whole life to be lived.
Yeah.
So there's also this idea that you're not your image. You are not your own image maker.
Yeah.
That you're made in the image
You're
of
made
God.
in the image
He is
of
the
God.
image maker.
Yes.
And he gave you a particular time, a particular place. He gave you particular gifts.
Yeah.
Your identity is secure because it was given to you. It's not maintained or created by you.
Yes.
That our identity in him has similarities with other Christians, but there's also like no one specific way that Christian identity is expressed.
Yeah.
This is like all of history. Though there's the whole world. Like, I'm assuming there are Christians in Egypt right now whose lives look radically different from mine.
Well, I think there's
similarities.
I think there's discontinuity and continuity,
right?
Because we all the one thing that we all share in common is the proclamation that Jesus is Lord.
And the things that are true for me are true for the Christian in Egypt right now. Those things remain the same. The things that are expected of me are the things that are expected of them. Yeah. Our lives, though, look different. Our identity looks different.
Yes, we're all called to allegiance in Christ, to Christ, and we're all, but what that allegiance looks like, obviously, is going to be radically different in, 3rd century Ethiopia and 21st century America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and even within the body of Christ, like even in our local embodied church, it's all different.
Yeah.
Because everybody's not, like, talking about the, we're all made up of different parts. Everybody's not an eye, everybody's not an ear. You know, somebody's the gallbladder.
Ooh. Yeah.
Serves a purpose. So, every life is not going to look the same. So there's not like one particular way it looks.
Yeah.
There's not like a look that's like, oh, that's a Christian. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Then he talks about the drug test. That our feelings all that matters. Yeah. And I always tell our kids that your emotions are a thermometer, not a thermostat. It can give you good information about what's going on. It cannot fix anything.
Yeah.
Like your emotions tell you, like, I get mad because something is amiss here, right? Yeah. But my anger is not the thermostat. It's not driving my decisions. It's just, it's letting me assess what's happening.
Well, the problem is when it does start driving.
Right. A lot of people are very emotionally driven.
Yeah.
That is a thing. And so for them, feelings would matter more. And I'm not saying feelings don't matter, because I do feel like feelings matter. But he's talking about the drug test of whether, if it even matters. Like, if I can change how I feel about something, does the something even matter? Yeah. Like, does my insignificance matter if I can just not feel insignificant? Yeah.
Being oblivious to it. Yeah.
Which, interestingly, he says that rather feel nothing at all. Interestingly, that is the outcome of most mood stabilizing drugs, is you don't feel anything at all.
Numbness.
Yeah. So he also talks about, think about how many products are just unnecessary and pointless.
Yeah.
I said the air fryer. I feel like this is the ultimate example of the
You're
most
going to probably have
pointless,
some folks offended by that. Wait a minute.
Probably. Is the most pointless invention in the kitchen. But our society is so efficient that we mass produce junk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
oh, yeah. And we fill landfills with it.
With the stuff we had to have,
and oftentimes spent a lot of money.
Goodwill is full of stuff people had to have,
and then a few years later, it's given to someone else or thrown in the dump. Yeah.
And because we want to know that our labor matters, and that was. I mean, our kids are going through it now, but I remember because I was choosing a community college when I was going to college. That was like a big thing for me. And it wasn't that I couldn't find meaning in those things. It was if it could be meaningful to me. Yeah. Because, like, there's meaning in, like, cosmetology. Yeah, like, absolutely. And we need them. Some people are excellent at it. There's great meaning. But could that be meaningful to me? Yeah. And so I chose nursing because that's the one that I felt like could be the most meaningful to me. Whereas some people would see that as being, like, not meaningful.
You could feel a sense of value in what you were doing. Yeah.
So he gets the idea that we're poured out and used up. And that's one thing that ministry has taught me, particularly, is just how to be used.
Yeah, how to be poured out. Yeah. How to be used up. Yeah.
Yeah, that people are going to take advantage, and, like, they're taking advantage, and that's fine, because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
Like, I know you're using me.
People took advantage of Jesus.
Like,
Yeah.
and like there's sometimes when you encounter a situation, you're like, they're using me, but that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And so you just do it, even though you know they're using you.
Yeah.
You know there's going to be no reciprocation. You know that, yes, it's going to be draining, but what else are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And that's a lot different from a society that's like, oh, make sure you put on your own oxygen mask before you help somebody else put on their oxygen mask. It's more the assumption that there is one oxygen mask and I'm going to let you have it.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to let you say the word because I'm too Southern.
Acedia?
And
prodigality. Prodigality.
You think it's prodigality?
Yeah. What would you think it is?
Prodigitally?
No.
I don't know.
No. Prodigality.
Prodigality.
And
acedia. Okay, so acedia is from
sloth.
Spiritual sloth.
Yeah.
It's a melancholy that causes spiritual detachment and laziness.
Yeah, well, it's not. We think of it as laziness because
no, it's not laziness.
It's not. It's like
spiritual
disinterest.
laziness.
It's spiritual laziness, and it's really apathy, disinterest.
Yeah,
detachedness.
Yeah, one definition I came across was the jangling of the nerves and the loss of purpose.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Like, because it was like that sense of like anxiety, but also worthlessness.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And so that's what I feel like that's what he's trying to get at.
Yeah.
In talking about like our current culture. Is that idea that like everyone's just kind of giving up, like it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And then prodigality.
Yeah.
Is
extravagance, wastefulness,
right?
Radical generosity,
doing things the hard way, taking the scenic route. Which I get mad at him all the time.
I hate staying on the highway if I can avoid it.
It is.
If I can avoid it.
But it'll take us like
going the back
3
roads.
times as long.
Yeah, but it'll be calmer, it'll be more pleasant, there'll be more shade, so it'll be less
crazy.
hot. Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this up talking about commitments. He talks about this idea of like growing where you're planted.
Yeah.
That there's
like physically. Yeah.
Like there's your commitments to your family.
Which you're given to and you belong to in covenant.
Right. You're given your commitment to your church.
Yep. Which you ought to belong to because you're given to in covenant. Right.
And in church he talks about like it's easier to cut and run when it's unpleasant, painful, and uncomfortable. I feel like most people do that, and people do that with their families now too. But people are so quick to do it with the church.
Yeah. Read Brett McCracken's book I mentioned last week. Uncomfortable. It's unbelievable.
And Chesterton was he made the statement. He did not make it in this way, but basically the church should be sanctifying.
Yeah.
Through friction.
Yeah. Through annoyances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The baby crying is supposed to make you holier.
Yeah. Like
other people annoying you will make you holier. Colossians 3, you're supposed to bear with one another.
Yeah.
That idea that I'm going to...
And when necessary, forgive one another.
That I'm going to be better because I learned to bear with them. But also when I'm the one that needs that bearing, they're going to bear with me because I can be annoying.
Yeah.
And there's something about me that people don't like.
Yeah.
Lots of people... More about me that people don't like than people like about you, probably. All right. And then he gives us commitment and community. Yeah. And so I think most people... Some people, though, I feel like get too committed to their community.
Where they can't be uprooted.
And I liken it to staying in Egypt. That God's calling you out, and you're like, no, I'm just going to stay in Egypt. I can do what you want here because these Egyptians need God. Yeah. But he called you out. Yeah. That's why you're staying.
No, if he's called you elsewhere, you better obey.
You got to go.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I see that a lot in people that are called to ministry, especially... and young people that are called to ministry, they don't want to leave. They don't want to leave their home. They don't want to leave their place. And I mean, maybe it's more of like when it's middle-aged or older, but like we get this sense that my place is so important that it's more important than God's calling. And I don't think that's what Noble is saying. No, I think he's saying that we don't think about our community that we're in enough,
Yeah.
in what we do with our lives.
We don't think of ourselves as being called to these people.
I don't
We
think
often
he's saying you shouldn't be called to missions.
Yeah.
Or you
No.
shouldn't be called to like pastor, and therefore that requires you to leave.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a great church where you're growing spiritually and you have a great pastor and you get called to be a pastor, you can't be a pastor at that church.
I mean,
That church has a pastor.
You might could, and if they're able to expand, but sure.
But typically,
yes.
the church has a pastor.
Yes.
If 10 people are called to the ministry in this church, all 10 people can't minister in this church in the capacity that they're called.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it requires us leaving and going places we're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
I feel like too many people leave the ministry because it requires them to move, or it requires them to like go places they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
I'm very glad God called us to Georgia, because I would have been very unhappy if he called us to like somewhere cold. I don't cold.
Yeah.
But I do feel like our community is important. I'm just saying, I don't think that he's talking about like, calling. I mean, maybe he is. Maybe I'm just trying to hold on to some idea that I shouldn't hold on to, but I don't know. So then he wraps it up by talking about grace. And he says, life is a long practice of accepting grace.
It's beautiful quote.
I feel like that's where he should have ended, but he didn't. He kept going for a little while. But
that would have been a great last line.
That would have been a great last line there. Because it is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the path towards sanctification. It's just accepting grace.
Yeah.
In little moments.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is it for a long video this week. We'll be back next week, talking chapters 6 and 7, which is the end. So join us then.